All right, so today we'll be going over the basic setup and usage of the annual budget processing area of New World Financial Management. The first area we'll be looking at is setup. Budgeting setup is done in several places, but mostly under the maintenance menu. So the first place we're going to go is into the company FM settings under maintenance. So that can be found here, down there, and then the company FM settings. On your annual budget levels tab, we can edit the names and numbers of budget levels that are available to your organization. The leftmost column of long fields is where you enter in your budget names, and your budget structure will only use the levels that have names entered for them. So if you only have up through level 3 named, for example, your budget information will only go through 3 levels total. So we're just going to go do that right now. And we can ignore these warnings. If any of these fields are grayed out, it is because there's currently budget information in process. You can only change budget level names and quantities when there is no budget work being done at the moment. The checkboxes under the transactions and position budgeting columns determines whether accounts at those levels will automatically calculate their values based on miscellaneous or position transactions associated with those accounts. This will only occur for accounts whose initialization methods are miscellaneous transactions or position budgeting, respectively. If neither checkbox is checked, the budget value for that account at that level can be edited manually in budget maintenance. Next, on the annual budget settings tab, there is one area that should be observed, and that is the current budget year. The current budget year value determines which years are available to be initialized for budget work, and the system allows you to initialize up to 2 years beyond the value filled in here. So if you're trying to initialize a year and it's not available, you'll want to check this tab. You may need to bump up the current budget year. So since it was 2003, we will set it to 2016. And you can change budget level security and maintenance under Logos Suite or New World ERP Suite, depending on your version, then under security, and then user-based security. For the currently selected user, NWS, there are several sets of options immediately available once you get here. The first column is your budget level maintenance security. This is the most important setting on this page. The levels that display here match the levels that you have set up in your annual budget levels tab under Company FM settings, which was the first page that I showed you. The levels that are checked will be the levels that the user is able to see and make changes to in budget maintenance. A user can promote accounts beyond any level they have access to, but if an account is currently at a level that they do not have checked here, they will not be able to see or change it. Forecasting security, that just determines if a user can do budget forecasting depending on the level that the accounts are at, and then reporting security governs which levels of budget information a user has access to for the purpose of running budget reports. So we'll give our user access to all 3 levels. Apparently I need to set the department here. Actually, let's just proceed for now. Sorry, there's one thing I have to do really quickly. Any user that you create is going to need a home department, so we'll just set that up. So now that we have that done, we can access the subledgers area of user-based security. Under the annual budget subledger, most of these options are grayed out because they don't apply. This is mostly for journal processing. But the GL Organizations tab determines which organization sets you have access to. Currently, we only have a single organization set up in this database. And since it's pushed over, our user is going to be able to access it in their annual budget processing, and they'll also be able to see it on budget reports and things like that. Make sure to save that. The last part of your main setup is going to be your budget methods, which is located in financial management, annual budget processing, budget preparation, and then budget methods. So this page here is going to show a table of all of the account classifications that any of the accounts you've set up are using. We only have a few accounts here, so the only classifications in use are taxes and personal services. But each of these account classifications has a budget method that you can configure for it. And any GL account that uses a particular account code is going to share the same classification as all other GL accounts that have that same account code. So the budget method lets you set up how accounts of their various classifications initialize. When you initialize your budget for a year, all of your GL accounts that are enabled for budgeting, they have to start at a base value. So your initialization method determines what they start with. So if you click into a classification, you'll have a number of initialization method options here. This determines the way the account initializes. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory. They'll use some value from the last year or some sort of multi-year trend value multiplied by a change factor. The easiest ones to use are going to be your actual, adopted, and amended, because you can refer to those values directly. And then you have a change factor option right here, which determines that the amount that the last year's value is going to be multiplied by as a percentage rate. Now, if you use an initialization method of miscellaneous transactions, however, that means that the account will automatically calculate its value based on transactions that are added to it, and it will do so at any levels that have transactions checked in the annual budget levels tab under your company FM settings. The same is true for position budgeting, which is further down on the list. Accounts with these methods will not auto-calculate on levels where those features are not checked, but they'll retain their value that they were promoted from last level with. But if you don't have those features checked, you can instead just manually enter a new value for the account at that level. Now, if you have miscellaneous transactions enabled, or you don't have to have it enabled in order to use the prior year transactions feature, but it is important if you're doing a miscellaneous transactions account if you'd like to save work. Basically, when you have this option checked, any transactions that were in an account last year, when you reinitialize them, those transactions are going to get copied over into the new year. So that saves you the work of re-entering them. You can change their value if you like, but they'll still get copied over from last year with the value that they had. This is very useful for anything where you have a yearly anticipated cost, such as cell phone bills or anything like that. So in order to actually begin your budgeting work, you'll need to initialize your budget. And that is done under annual budget processing, and then budget preparation, and then initialize budgets. And we can leave this page since we're not actually making any changes. So once you're on the initialization method, you'll need to choose the budget year to initialize for, and like I had mentioned previously, it goes 2 years out from the budget year that you declare in your FM settings. So we'll just initialize for 2016 since that's what's available. So any funds that are available in here, you can push them over in order to initialize them. Now, if a fund can't be budgeted, you'll get a warning and you can just proceed with the other funds. Or if it's already in budget processing, you don't have to initialize all of your funds at the same time. You can do them one by one over a period of time if you like. Now, if you've initialized your budget but decide you want to change your mind on that, you can always use the uninitialized budgets option here. And what that will do, you can follow the same steps as you would for initializing, and that will basically take the budget back out of your annual budget processing for the year that you've selected. So that will delete all of your current data from budget processing. So if you were to reinitialize the budget again, it will start over with its initial values. It won't retain the work that you had previously done. So, once you've initialized one or more funds, the organization sets within those funds are now accessible for your users to make changes to. You'll be able to do that under the annual budget, the budget maintenance option here, which apparently I do not have the security set up for it, so I'm actually going to load the security from a different page so I can just get straight on in there. There we go. So this is what your budget maintenance screen is going to look like. You can click the Show Search button here, and this will bring up a useful panel. One thing I do recommend is before doing any of your budget work, make sure that you've got the correct budget year selected. If you have multiple budget years open, you may end up making changes to the wrong year's budget if you just go in here and click into an org set and start editing things, because you might not know which year you're pointed to. So, in order to make changes to your budgeting, just click into an organization set. So here you see all of the accounts that belong to the organization set, at least by classification. It will usually show revenues or expenses. You can't really show both at the same time, but you can flip back and forth between them. You could also do a summarization view where it divides it into the actual account classifications, but you can't actually do any budgeting work here. This is just for review purposes, since it sums everything together. So you'll see a column bearing the name of the current budget year and the level that the org is at. So since we just initialized the budget, we're going to be at 2016 level 1 for all these accounts. And these are the fields where you enter in budget values for those accounts. So you can do that, for example, and then save your work. Now, if the field is grayed out in here, it means that the account is one that auto-calculates. So that is going to be if it's either a miscellaneous transactions account or a position budgeting account, and it's at a level where that applicable option is set for that budget level under your FM settings. Now, if you click the icon next to selected columns up here, you can actually change the columns that you see on this page, which can be useful for comparing information across multiple years. This will bring up a window that lets you pick 3 extra columns to display, as well as additional informational options here. So we could pull in the 2015 amended, 2014 adopted, and 2013 adopted if we wanted to, and do that. Naturally, we don't have any budget data for those years, so they're just going to come in as zeros. But this, lets you bring in extra columns to compare your account's previous information with, which is useful. And there's a number of buttons along the bottom that also provide useful functionality. The first one is spread, which is grayed out. I'll explain that one last. The transactions button lets you attach actual miscellaneous transactions to the highlighted account. So you just highlight the account and hit transactions, and then you're brought here. You can add, edit, or remove transactions, and then once you've got a transaction set up, you can apply its value as the total of the account for that level. So for example, if we know we have 5 different cell phone plans totaling $12.50, it'll tell you what's currently entered for the budgeted amount, but you can see the balance of all the transactions under here, and then if you want to, you can just then flash that into the account's number for that level. So now it's $12.50. But since we don't have the account set to initialize as a miscellaneous transactions account, we can still manually edit this number whenever we want to. One thing to keep in mind is that the value of transactions at previous levels are preserved. So if you were to create a transaction on a budget account and then advance the account to a higher level, you can actually change the transaction's value at the higher level, but it will only keep track of it. It keeps track of the previous values it had at the previous levels. So you can still pull up a report to view the values that it's had across multiple levels, even if you've changed it several times. That's primarily done in reporting functionality, which we'll cover later. The inquiry button, when you click that, when you've got an account highlighted, that will just take you to the GL account inquiry page for the highlighted account. Which can also just be accessed under financial management, and then if you go all the way down to inquiries, you can get there as well. So by doing that, we can get straight to here. And see all this extra information for the account that we had selected. And then we can just breadcrumb back using the link at the top. The history button will bring up a window that plots the history of a budgeted account. The amount of data you see will depend on how many previous years of budget activity this account has seen. And then the 5-year trend button will show the last 5 years of adopted, amended, and actual activity for the account. So add accounts. This is useful. This lets you add additional accounts that belong to the same GL organization set. So for example, if you've added a GL account to an org set after you've already initialized the budget and didn't accept the link on the GL account add page that automatically adds it to the in-process budget, you can come here and use the Add Accounts button to do that. And likewise, you can also just delete accounts from being in budget processing by using the delete key. And you can only add accounts to budgeting that are actually set for annual budgeting, and they're in the chart of accounts there as well. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So the spread button, which I had mentioned earlier, which is grayed out currently, the spread button is going to be grayed out until you advance this GL org set to the very last level. And what that does is it lets you allocate the budget of the selected account across multiple months in the next budget year. So ordinarily when you adopt the budget, the system will place the entire budgeted amount of the account onto the very first day of the first month. So the spread feature allows you to override that, and you can split the budget evenly across 12 months. So 1/12 of the budget shows up on each of the first days of the next 12 months. You could use a trend analysis to automatically allocate money based on past history of which months tend to require the most money will automatically get more. Or you can manually enter in your own percentages for each month that sum to a total of 100% of the distribution. And once we've actually advanced this org set all the way to the top, I can actually show you what that looks like. Now, as a note, there is a mass spread feature under your budget processing menu. And that will work the same as the spread button does on this page, except it lets you highlight multiple accounts and even multiple org sets all at the same time, and then apply the same spread functionality to all of them just to save yourself some work. So all of these features here, they're also available and work essentially the same if you're using the budget maintenance by GL account feature rather than our normal budget maintenance by org set, which is what we're doing. Some organizations have budget maintenance by GL account instead of the ordinary budget maintenance system. But I believe in 9.5 you can actually access both simultaneously, so it becomes a matter of personal preference at that point. So once your budget work at a particular level for a GL organization set is finished, you can advance the org set to the next level. And we do that under financial management, annual budget processing, and then advanced budget. So we search for a level to advance from. And we see that our Fund 100 is available to advance from. And depending on how you have things set up, you may advance individual org sets belonging to a fund, or you may advance whole funds all at the same time. So once you're ready, either way, you advance the items within the fund by pushing them over to the box to the right and then hitting advance. And then, in order to access these items, oh, I see. The security configuration we did earlier may not have stuck. That's why. Oh, we may have to log out. Okay, so as you can see now our Fund 100 is at level 2, and if we click back into it, you'll see that level 2 is now the new available column. Now if we want to, we could actually bring in our current year columns as one of the selectable columns here. So if we do that, we can see what it was at level 1, and then we can change these values if we like. So by doing so, you advance your budget up your organizational hierarchy, to department leaders and such. They may make changes, and then you advance it further from that. Once all of the GL organization sets for a particular fund have been advanced to the final level, and you'll be able to tell that because you won't be able to find them in advanced processing anymore. And I'll show you that right now. So our Fund 100 is at level 2. If we advance it again, you'll note that level 3 is not selectable. That's because you can't advance it from level 3 to anywhere else. Once it's at level 3, the only thing that you can do is adopt it. And that depends on the number of budget levels that you have set up. Some organizations have 4, 5, or even 6 budget levels, and then all of them will appear here depending on whether you have the security to do so. But the final level is never going to show up here. So since we can't see it anymore in advanced processing, that must mean that it's at the highest level. And now that it is, I can actually show you what the spread feature looks like. Under here. And again, we just highlight an account and then hit spread. So we have several different methods available. The evenly over the year, that will just evenly allocate the total amount that you've got entered for the account across all the 12 months. So $1,800 divides nicely and evenly into $150 for each month. We could also do it based on a previous 5-year trend, and we don't have any historical data in this system here, so it's still going to just do that. Or you could spread based on user-defined percentages, where January is going to always contain the remainder of whatever percentages that you enter. So as you enter in percentages, you'll see the page refresh, and January will begin to tick down from 100% to whatever is left over after all of the other months are filled in. So as you can see down here, it's then taking that percentage and applying it to the spread amount. It'll always do a little bit of rounding to whole dollars, so it won't work out to exactly the percentages that you declare. But after you're all set up, you just hit OK. So now it's got a spread on it, which you can see that there's a check mark in the spread column that indicates that. Now, if we go back to spread, the last feature is consolidate, which when you do that, it just undoes the spread and then reapplies the entire amount just back to January. So it's as though you never did the spread in the first place. Now, if your advanced processing allows you to advance individual GL organization sets rather than whole funds, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that even for organization sets that contain accounts that you aren't planning to use and therefore have $0 budgeted, if they show up, you still have to advance them along with all the other organization sets in order to adopt that fund. Once all of your organization sets for a fund are at the highest level, you will be able to choose that fund for adoption. And adoption is done under budget processing and then adopt budget. So, as always, it's important to observe the budget year that you're doing this for, just to make sure that you don't adopt information for the wrong year. The department doesn't really matter. That's just going to be the department that the journaling is done under. Can't really choose one here since I don't have anything assigned, but that doesn't matter. So the two checkboxes here, the final budget checkbox, what that will do is once you adopt your budget, all of the organization sets in that fund, they're going to be removed from your budget maintenance altogether. So basically your budget's set in stone at that point by doing a final budget. You can do budget adjustment journals if you have to make further changes after that, but you won't be able to change your account's initial adopted values. So if you don't choose the final budget option, then what will happen is the accounts will get their adopted values, but the fund will remain in budget processing so you can continue to make changes to it. And that will let you re-adopt it later, which will overwrite your previous adopted numbers. And the post-spread option, that will determine if you actually have done spreading on any of your accounts like I had showed you a minute ago. You have to actually make sure to check the post-spread budget option here in order to make the spreads apply. Otherwise, they won't, and the accounts will just get their full amounts in January or whatever the first month of your budget year is. So all that's left here is to hit adopt. And yep, again, the electric department won't let us do that, but that's all right. So we'll just move it back. So there's also a number of reports that are useful for budget planning and tracking. The two main ones are your budget performance report and your budget worksheet report. So I'll just go over those ones. So the budget performance report is under financial management reports, budgetary, and then budget performance. So this report shows you how your organization's transaction activity is actually matching up against the budgets that you had set out for it. So you declare your report date range, whether you do fiscal year to date or life to date or other, and whether you want to do your annual budget balances or year to date, which is mostly important if you've done a spread for the budget. And just down here, you just choose all of your report filters to determine which organizations and accounts that you see. And then when you run that report, you'll just get a good breakdown of whether the transactions that have hit accounts are staying within your budget parameters, or if you're going over budget on certain months or certain accounts. It's basically so you can see if the money you've projected to spend or earn is less or more than what is actually taking place. So the other one, the budget worksheet report, is under reports, annual budget, and budget worksheet. So about this report, it's designed to assist in planning your annual budget. It's not really meant to be an analysis tool for past or current fiscal year performance. That's what the budget performance report is for. This just is supposed to be a broader tool for looking at the previous adopted, amended, and actual values of your budgets in the past, so you can get a bigger picture to work from when you're doing your actual annual budget entry. So with this report, you just push over the organizations and accounts that you want, and the budget year that you choose is important. You'll only be able to see budget years that have previously transpired already or are currently in budget processing. So since 2016 is the only available year, that's all that we've got here. But the budget year that you choose will determine the perspective that the report is written from. And for the report, you get a number of columns that you can add. As you can see here, a lot of these columns are similar to the ones that are selectable in your actual budget maintenance page. So you can see your last 5 years adopted, amended, and actuals. And you can also see your current year level 1, 2, and 3 ones. If we had changed this to a different budget year, the years that are available would actually shift to resemble what would be available in that chosen budget year. And we've also got these calculated columns here, which are kind of neat. If you add one of these, by double-clicking on it, it makes these available, and you can declare the values from other columns to be these little A and B variables, and then you choose a formula to apply to them. So you could do that to, compare your adopted versus actual budget for 2012, for example. So if you did an A minus B, what it would do for that account line, it would just take the 2012 adopted and subtract the actual from it, so you can see how much you were off. You could also do a division or an A minus B / B operation as well. And then just hit apply, and then that will be what the calculated column uses. So a calculated column doesn't need to actually reference other oh, it actually can't reference other calculated columns in its A and B values. So yeah, that is about it for the worksheet report. Oh, aside from, if you want to see transactions on your budget worksheet, you can actually make it do that by checking the print transactions option, and you can have it show either budget transactions, which is the ones that you add to accounts individually, position transactions, which would be anything that your payroll module has shipped over as position budgeting for individual salaries and such, or you can just do everything if you want to. And you can only look at a single transaction level at a time, so this is what lets you see what a transaction happened to be at a current level. So this one can be a little bit confusing. If you're running your budget worksheet report for a particular budget level, say you're currently at level 2, you probably want to set your budget level to level 2 for your transactions. That way you're looking at the numbers that your transactions had at level 2. And then all you have to do is go ahead and do print, and that will give you that report. So if you add a GL account to a budgeted fund after budget work has begun, when saving the GL account, you'll be prompted with a question asking if you'd like to add the account to the in-process budget work for the year. And that would be done under your chart of accounts, under Logos-Suite, chart of accounts, GL account list. If you go to search, and if we were to hit new and try to create a new GL account, even though currently all of our account and organization set combinations have been used up at the moment, if you were to create a new account and set it to be budgeted, so have its account status include budgets and then have a budget type other than not budgeted, when you save it, the system will prompt you and ask you if you want to add it to the current in-process budget if the fund that the account belongs to is currently being budgeted in any year. If you say no, it won't add it, but you can always use the Add Accounts button on the budget maintenance page to add it again later. All right, so this concludes the Budgeting Basics course. I guess we can open up the floor to any questions from the group chat. All right, let's see. So I see we have a number of questions.
We do have some questions. Let me just make sure that I can fully read them. I'll be happy to help you here.
Okay.
Okay, the first question that we have is, what is the maximum number of characters allowed in comments?
Okay, so I take it the user means by comments the individual comments that you can assign to GL accounts?
It's not clear to me here in the text.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. It's probably these comments right here. So, and apparently each individual budget level is going to track comments separately. I don't know offhand, but given the size of the text box, I'm guessing that it's either going to be 256 or 512 characters. I'll have to look into that and then get back to the user for that question.
Sure. Well, we can put that in the FAQ, so that will certainly get clarified. And the same question is asked of allowed in the notes field, so I guess we can look at both of those. Okay. Let's see the next question. Sorry.
So for notes work a little bit differently. They're more like kind of like internal emails that are addressed to particular users, and this is kind of universal throughout the entire system wherever notes comes into play.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll just kill that one for now. All right, so can the selected columns have a set template and budget maintenance grid configurations? Selected columns have a set template. we be able to have Megan elaborate on that a little bit by any chance?
Certainly,
quite
Megan,
sure
if
what
you
you
want
mean.
to. Okay, let's see. I will keep my eyes open and see if Megan does type in anything else.
Okay. Let's see. When using transactions, if all entries are deleted, what does the amount not update to 0? Okay. So if the transactions are not, if the amount on the account is not updating to $0 when you delete the transactions, like I said, if you're working in an account where this box is white and you can just freely enter in a dollar value, anytime you're doing transaction items, if you get rid of everything, you have to manually apply the transaction total as the budgeted amount. Now, the only time this isn't true is when you have an account that's classified as one that uses miscellaneous transactions, and only when the organization set is at a budget level that has the transactions checkbox checked. So I'll show you here again. You see how there's these 3 columns here? Basically, when you have a box checked here for transactions, it means that the account will auto-calculate if it uses miscellaneous transactions as its initialization method. So that's the only time when it should automatically update to 0. Otherwise, you have to do it manually.
Terrific. We do have clarification from the asker of the question that we were waiting for. The question says, can it be set so it is the same for all users? So this was going back to the...
Oh, I see.
Does that make sense?
The selected columns on your budget maintenance, that should be on a user-by-user basis. So everybody manually sets up their own favorite view. Now, regardless of the org set you go into, your selected columns will not change until you change them again. But there's no way to forcibly apply a particular view of certain columns to all of your users. Sorry, excuse me.
Okay. The next question I see is, can you give scenarios where an agency would need to uninitialize a budget?
Well, the only situation that I could see is if a lot of bad data was entered for... The thing about budget advancement is you can't unadvance your org sets back down to previous levels. So if you're an organization where the auditing is really, really strict about every single level of budgeting, and you have numbers that weren't satisfactory at previous levels, you could uninitialize there to just wipe everything out and start over if you had to. That's really the only situation where I imagine that would be useful.
Okay. The next question, is there a report for comparing transaction totals versus budget total? For example, users enter 20,000 in transactions but fail to click apply to budget.
A report for comparing transactions. Well, that's what the budget worksheet would be for. You basically just tell it to include your transactions and set it to the level that you want to look at, and then just run your actual level data for that level for those accounts as well alongside it. So you'll see the number that was manually entered for that level as well as the sum total of all the transactions for that level. So that would be your primary way of comparing these items.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. The next question, once you advance from one level to the next, not necessarily the last level, can you make changes in position budgeting and promote those new changes so they appear in the budget?
I think it's possible to resend position budgeting information over from HR. I'm not familiar with the HR module myself, so that would be more of a question for a human resources presenter going through a position budgeting webinar, I think. But we can still try to track that information down and include it in our FAQs.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Under budget methods, where you can place a check mark for initialize, with prior year transactions, does that just keep the transactions, or does it keep the transactions and the previous dollar amount?
It'll keep the transactions and the previous dollar amount. So that's part of what saves you the work.
Ah, okay. Next question, can you organize a budget worksheet report by department for the entire organization instead of one department at a time?
It may be possible to do so. That's presuming that by department the user means the organization level 2 rather than starting at the fund as the main way to organize it, because it usually goes by fund first, and then within the fund it'll organize down to function, which for most users is their actual physical departments that are just given a chart of accounts value. But let's see, summarize to organization level. It's possible to summarize to it. So I think what it'll do, if you set it up like that, it'll actually consolidate all of the GL accounts that belong to different funds but belong to the same department. So if you have, Fund 100 and then Department 410, and then your 3,000 account under that, it'll combine it with the 200 funds, 410 Department 300 account, and it'll group them under the 410 department, but it's consolidating those GL accounts by department rather than by fund or anything else like that. So that may be possible, but I don't think it's possible to break the order of things where it orders by department first and then breaks it out by fund underneath that. Generally, the reports don't usually allow you to do that. You'd have to probably just export it and then manually rearrange things.
Okay. Is the account type drop-down on the budget org list a feature? Is it a recent update? Because this questioner says that she's not aware of having that feature.
Okay. Well, let's see. I have a budget org list. Let's see. Under show search. Account type drop-down on the budget org list. Okay, well, it's not in my 9.4 environment. Let me check on our 9.5 and see if.
Well, we could include that in the FAQ. That's certainly fine.
Okay.
Let's see. Is there a way to bring over last year's comments to the current year budget processing?
No, comments, notes, and documents, they don't get brought back over. We have had suggestions for that, so the user may want to look in our software suggestions and ideas area and find one of those suggestions and vote for it. That's what I would suggest in that situation.
Okay, and we had another request. How, where, and when can you import a budget, or will this be covered in the advanced webinar?
Okay, let's see. You should be able to import your budget whenever you're working on it. In fact, it should just be able to take a standard Excel spreadsheet, I believe, just using the import button on your budget maintenance list after you've initialized it. Yeah. So we don't actually have any import types set up here, but yeah, it's been possible to do a budget import for a while for a number of versions now.
Okay. So perhaps that's something we should include as a topic for a future webinar or demonstrate in a future webinar?
Yeah. Yeah, we can possibly do that.
If you use the budget spread and spread it evenly over 12 months, can a department actually spend more than the amount budgeted for a particular month?
It can. One thing I didn't mention during the presentation was that the budget spread is really for reporting and reference purposes only. There's nothing that'll actually do budget validation with only the amount of money that's been allocated to that account based on where they are in the year. Any sort of budget validation that takes place when you're doing like accounts payable or purchasing or anything, that is still going to use the annualized full amount of the account. So whatever the amount had for its entire whole year value is what it's going to be compared to. So it is entirely possible to go over budget for a particular month if you've done a spread. And there's nothing the system will do about it. It's just not programmed to do so.
Okay. I do want to let you know that we have a lot more questions than we're going to be able to fit into this time slot. So I think we'll try to do a couple more, and then we will try to address all the questions in an FAQ. But I apologize that we're just not going to be able to answer all of these. The next one, is there a way to put fund descriptions somewhere to be printed on the budget worksheet?
Fund descriptions. Well, I mean, when you run the budget worksheet, it should give the fund's full name because it organizes it in a hierarchy where it'll show the fund first, and then it should be indenting and then showing the department like any other report does, really. I'd have to take a look at that myself to see if what the user's talking about.
Okay.
If it does work any differently than other reports, but it should be automatically including the fund's entire name and description on there. Just in my example, I just have our 100 fund just called Fund 100 because I couldn't think of anything else to call it.
Okay. All right, and why don't we take the last question. Can you create budget worksheet reports on the fly as you need them, i.e., is it just a report and is it not actually changing the budget at all?
Yeah, the budget worksheet report, all it does is it's just a report on the annual budget data that's currently in the system. So you can run as many budget worksheet reports as you want whenever you want. The only time it's going to change is if you've actually changed something in budget maintenance.
Okay. Well, at this point, I think we're, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
Well, we've got it. It's 5 after the hour, and we started just a little bit late, and I wanted to just respect your time today. And again, we will be providing a recording of the webinar and also the FAQ for you to review. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for your presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome.